internet. My name is Matthew Kroll.
And this conversation can serve no purpose any longer. My name is Shahir Dowd.
And this is the only podcast about movies, specifically the film 2001, A Space Odyssey.
What year is it?
What year is it?
It's 2018.
It is 2018.
The movie came out in 1968.
That is, yep.
So we're 50 years.
When will then be now?
When will then be? I think
Soon.
we're catching up. We're
Yes.
slowly No, we've passed 2001.
Yeah, sure.
Okay, the reason...
I was making a Spaceballs reference. I'm sorry. Hi, everybody.
Hi, everyone. Welcome back to the podcast. I don't know where you've been.
We don't know where we've been.
But we're doing a special episode this week because this week is going to be the 50th anniversary re-release of 2001: A Space Odyssey, playing in 70mm engagements throughout America, Los Angeles, New York. So if you live in one of the smaller cities, it might be a little bit difficult to get to. But the reason this was prompted on is that 2001: A Space Odyssey is just having a special 70mm restoration at the Cannes Film Festival presented by none other than Christopher Nolan, who cites it as one of his favorite movies. He talks about that scene, you know, the blue Danube scene, the spaceships docking for the first time. He says, I must have watched that scene at least 20 times, and every time the space station enters that shot, it moves me. The emotional impact of this film has a direct, is more direct than empathetic. You travel through the Stargate yourself, and you're in there with it. And he says that this film has amazing multiple viewing capabilities. So with that in mind, I thought we should revisit this film, but I wanted to do something a little different this time around.
What did you do?
Which is awkward because we've been sitting here with a third person in the room during that entire long introduction. But one of the things I'm interested in is I think in film criticism, we tend to basically live amongst our own circles. We only talk about films with film people.
I don't know what you're talking about.
And we have tried this before, and we've done this very successfully with, for example, Jamie Walsh came on our episode about Phantom Thread, so a fashion designer came on to talk about a fashion film. And I wanted to bring an astronomer in. So joining us today is Dr. Jana Grcevich, an astronomer who works primarily at the American Museum of Natural History. Is that correct?
Yeah, I used to work at the American Museum of Natural History. Now I work as a data scientist.
Okay, so tell us a little bit about how you got involved. Well, tell us a little bit about your work.
First and foremost, hello.
Hi. Good to be here.
Shahir gets so excited about our guest
I got excited.
that he does not take the time to greet. And how are you this morning?
Good, how are you?
Good. We're doing this very early.
Yes.
But now the human part of interaction is done, Shahir.
I'm going to go complete Hal on this entire conversation,
Good,
so
good,
it's going to be all data from me. I wanted to reach out to you because of your work, but could you tell us a little bit about what it is you do now? I think this is going to be fascinating because we're such, like film buffs, and then we don't have any interaction with anyone outside of that world.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, when I was working as an astronomer, I was studying dwarf galaxies. Okay. So they're still very large, but very small compared to our galaxy, the Milky Way. So only 1,000th or even less the mass of our galaxy. And they're kind of mysterious because we think there should be many more of them around our galaxy than we actually observe. So part of what I was doing was looking for new dwarf galaxies in the general region of our galaxy.
What do you extrapolate from studying dwarf galaxies? What is there to be learned from studying dwarf galaxies?
So there's a mystery about dark matter. We don't know what this is, but we see its effects in gravity. So galaxies would have formed differently if there weren't this mysterious unknown stuff out there that's increasing the mass of all the galaxies that we see. And so we can run computer simulations and see how different sizes of galaxies form. And what those simulations tell us is that there should be lots of these little galaxies if the other things that we know to be true about dark matter are true. And so it's kind of accessing these questions about this unknown stuff.
Right.
Maybe it's a particle that hasn't been discovered yet. Maybe it's, a different type of thing.
Yeah.
But there's a lot of questions around that. And so by looking at how the dwarf galaxies move and how they're structured, you can kind of get a little bit better of an idea of what's going on.
You've also written a book, which I just read, by the way, The Vacation Guide to the Solar System, which was it's an odd thing, but it's absolutely delightful. It's essentially a travel guide to the Milky Way.
Yep.
Is that a good way to
exactly. It's like it's written like a travel guide. So you've got a chapter for each place you might visit. And what we're trying to do is, instead of kind of looking at a planet from the outside, we want to imagine what it would be to actually stand there. For example, if you're going to a planet where you can stand,
sure.
Yeah.
And what you would see and what you would experience actually going there.
And the interesting thing here is that it's filled with facts and sort of fun data points, but it's told in a way that how you stand it. And most of the time, I was terrified. Yeah,
space is not a very friendly place.
No,
human life. Yeah,
space is terrifying. I have enough earthly fears, but when you really, I have what I call my sort of circle of nightmare, which is like, oh, here we are on our little planet. Well, we kind of understand what's going on. Okay, but really outside of a certain area, we have no idea. We can kind of guess, oh my God, there's infinite space. There's infinite space. There could be anything there. That means there possibly is anything there. And now, you know what? I'm too small. I'm back to the beginning. Like it's a circle of fear I'm very familiar with. Space is terrifying.
It really is. It really is. And it's not necessarily your average vacation.
No. Although one point you guys do make in the introduction to the book is that there has been recently entrepreneurial progress in, for example, Elon Musk and Jeff Bezos as well into like pioneering space travel as a much more accessible thing. It's obviously not. It's getting there. I think we'll see that in our lifetime, and it's not an easy thing. So I think it really underscores how space captures people's imagination. Right, that we're trying to send people there, even though it's completely impractical in every way, almost
in a leisurely fashion.
Yep.
It actually, just a real quick jump to 2001 when I was rewatching it, I was like, this space flight is empty, and it is so expensive to do. I'm like, there was no way this would actually run. I don't care how many pairs of grip boots they were selling. I don't know. I was thinking of the actual financial implications of doing just the one trip to the space station, and I was like, well, they never launched that then.
Absolutely.
And just to sort of make the distinction as well, as an astronomer, a lot of your work is physics, math, data analysis. But do you ever, astronomy is a kind of culmination of basically those things combined with this desire to understand what's up there. Do you ever want to go up there?
I'm afraid of flying in airplanes.
Right, okay.
But I think even so, if I had the opportunity, I would have to take it.
Yeah.
Right. Because it's just such an amazing experience.
Yeah. And have you ever, because making the jump from astronomer to astronaut is quite a dramatic one. I've been watching who's the latest astronomer who was posting YouTube videos? Captain Tom. I've gone blank on his surname.
From the space station?
Yeah, from the space station. I've just been.
His name is Tom, I remember.
Oh, Hadfield.
Hadfield, yes, Captain Hadfield. I've been watching all of his videos. Does that kind of doing data analysis from up there or running experiments up there, has that ever kind of interested you?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. It would interest me. I think even the thing that really captures me about being, for example, in orbit is how all of these ordinary things become extraordinary, right? Like there's a video of Commander Hadfield like wringing out a wet washcloth, and the way it acts is just so compelling.
Yeah, it sticks to your hand,
different.
right?
Yeah, it just kind of creates this bubble around the washcloth, and there's a million examples of these where you're just taking the everyday into space, and it becomes extraordinary.
So I'm going to throw out all of that amazing work that you've been doing.
Way to go.
And then ask you dumb questions now. And the dumbest one is, what is your desert island movie? Like, isn't it? And there is a point to this question, but the point being that I think at some point for you, your imagination must have been sparked about space, and I'm curious if maybe movies wasn't the thing that did it. Maybe it was books, maybe it was painting, maybe it was just looking up into the stars. But I'm curious if movies did play a part.
It was. I can directly trace it back to movies and television. Sci-fi was what got me interested in space, and so I didn't. My family wasn't particularly interested in science, but I was a huge Trekker.
Yeah,
Star Trek: The Next Generation.
Yep.
on all the time. And my desert island movie was, I was thinking of what it would be. I realized I spent an entire summer in middle school watching the Star Wars trilogy. Every day I would wake up in the morning, I would go to the basement, I would I would put in the first Star Wars movie, I'd break for a BLT for lunch. I'd watch the whole thing over and over again, like this repetition, and it really captured me. So I think, my desert island movie would be Empire Strikes Back. Even though it's kind of like a darker one, so maybe it's not the best choice for keeping positive in a desert island scenario. But I feel like it's the one that it's a comfort to me because I have that history with it. So I could watch it over and over again.
That's what we've been finding a lot when we ask people the desert island question, is it doesn't so much have to do, it has to do with the way a movie makes you feel, and a lot of that is your experience with it, either as a child or the first time you saw it, etc. My desert island movie was Masters of the Universe,
which I actually think plays in the same way.
In a little bit, it kind of does, which is a totally, way even more ridiculous than Star Wars is ridiculous in its own. And Shahir's, yours was
If for Fake, which is a sort of slightly obscure documentary
by Orson Welles.
Yeah.
So it's these things where it's like, You need to be able to ingest it. If it's the only form of entertainment you have on an island, you have to be able to ingest it comfortably again and again and again. So I think Star Wars is an excellent choice. Empire Strikes Back in particular.
It's arguably the best of the Star Wars to date.
I would
agree.
Now, as far as modern science fiction go, like what's kind of captured your attention recently?
I haven't watched as much as I would like to, but I have been watching Lost in Space, and I've been pleasantly surprised.
On Netflix.
I didn't have high expectations, but I'm enjoying that.
I hear the robot is particularly sexy.
It's weirdly sexy.
Yeah, this is like me.
Like designed like from a new tablet is sexy, or like a
no, it's a robot.
No, I know, but I'm saying like there's tech that's sexy, and there's.
I'd say both.
Okay. All right, why not?
I think he's got a sexy butt, apparently. Like, there are memes all over the internet about the robot from Lost in Space. Is he just called the robot, or has he got a name?
Well, he was.
I can't think of a name other than,
in the show, he was just robot. In the original series, but I haven't watched that in a long time. And then there's obviously the Matt LeBlanc driven vehicle. I think it was in '96. Of Lost in Space. What's Gary Oldman was Dr. Smith.
There you go.
How is Parker Posey as Dr. Smith?
I think she does a great job. Yeah. Mm-hmm. She's creepy.
I thought that was a perfect role for her. So I will get to that series as soon as I can.
And one little last side note is as the Star Wars franchise has continued on, are you do you enjoy the new ones? Are you kind of?
I do. I watch them. I watch them once. It's kind of a tradition. I go home for Christmas. I'll watch it with my brother if it's coming. When it's coming out then. So.
But it's not the same kind of. Do you still watch the original Star Wars like in that sort of way?
I haven't in a while. I should go back to it and see how it is. But yeah, it doesn't capture me the same way. I think it's a little hard actually because it's harder for me to get into science fiction now.
Because you know too much.
You know all the rules.
It is like it does have to have a certain level of like accuracy for me to be able to suspend my disbelief now, more so than the ones that I did watch when I was a child because I just take those in and for some reason I still can watch those and it doesn't bother me. But I do have like the accuracy problem, I would say.
That's a good problem to have.
Emotional ties I've found with films can sort of beat the any sort of inaccuracy, or even I'll even go one step beyond. Like you've obviously learned all the inaccurate things that are in most science fiction films more so than the average film goer. But like even if a movie breaks its own rules that it sets, I can forgive if it's a film that I've been watching since I was 8.
Yep.
But newer films will be like, no, this is not okay, and I will throw it under the bus.
So with all that said, actually, Star Wars is a great reference because I want to just briefly mention the fact that when I went and saw 2001: A Space Odyssey for the first time, I think I was about 20 years old, and it was playing in 70 millimeter. Around the corner from me, and I brought like 4 or 5 of my friends along, and my whole precursor, I hadn't seen the film at that time, but my whole precursor was, this is the film that inspired Star Wars. So everyone I took to it was expecting Star Wars. And let me just say, half of them walked out during the intermission, and there was only a couple of us left behind. But Matt, tell us with that in mind, tell us what 2001: A Space Odyssey, Stanley Kubrick's 1968 film, is about.
Sure. I'll just jump over to the IMDb page real quick and read the best basically synopsis I can think of this film. Here we go. Humanity finds a mysterious, obviously artificial object buried beneath the lunar surface, and with an intelligent computer, the HAL 9000 sets off on a quest.
Accurate, somewhat.
Clinically
accurate.
Side note: when I watched this again, speaking of just going back to the Star Wars, I was like, every time it showed the interior of a spaceship, I'm like, oh, gee, George, where'd you get all your stuff?
Yeah,
it looks so. I mean, everything looks like the hangar bay looks like the hangar bays in the Death Star. Every possible control surface is the 3 big rectangle buttons on the black glass. Like, it's all very like. We see where the spark came from.
I think for George Lucas, it's more influential in THX than it is in Star Wars.
Oh, really?
When he watched. I mean, he was majorly influenced by 2001 as a student, and he said, "I wanted to make a film like that," and that's THX. Although it does carry over into Star Wars as well. I wrote a kind of a different synopsis because I think I felt like if you're listening to this and you haven't seen 2001: A Space Odyssey, you might do that thing which is what I did, and which we've just kind of like alluded to as well, is go, oh, it's the precursor to Star Wars, and it is nothing like Star Wars at all, as my friends learnt on that one trip.
Like maybe this could mean a million different things. A spiritual precursor to Star Wars?
I think certainly a visual influence.
Visual, let's go with that.
Yeah, but so what I wrote was that it using a near operatic and musical structure, and I think that was really important. 2001: A Space Odyssey tells an epic tale of humanity's journey from pre-evolutionary apes mastering tools for the first time to a mind-bending space voyage to Jupiter and beyond the infinite, to uncover the secrets of a mysterious monolith which appears at key epochs of human evolution. The film is the very definition of epic, not only traversing millennia, but also across the entire galaxy, touching on human evolution, depictions of space travel, which predate our first journey to the moon, artificial intelligence and its implications, and a near hallucinogenic trip which ponders the next stage of humanity. I think I just had to do that because I don't want anyone who's listening to this who hasn't seen 2001: A Space Odyssey think we're recommending the prequel to Star Wars.
Right. Okay. Understood.
Yeah.
I want to jump back real quick. So I obviously, my quote was from the apes in the very beginning of The Dawn of Man, as the font tells us. You said how they discovered tools. I was expecting, and again, I hadn't seen this in so long, so I remembered the beats, but not so much the minutia of what happens. I was watching it and I was like, oh, they touch the monolith and then they get this is in the very beginning. This isn't much spoilers and it's an old film. So if you haven't watched it by now, there will be spoilers sprinkled throughout this conversation. I was like, oh, the ape is going to use a tool now and that's going to be great. And then I was like, oh, no, it's not really it's technically a tool, but it's a weapon. He discovers how to use a weapon. And then I was like, this is reading darker than I remember when I watched it the first time. And I was I was a little bit taken aback because I was like, he's going to invent a thing that helps him or makes fire or something. And I was like, no, he just knows how to crush skulls now. And that made me a little sad.
Yeah, I also didn't remember that happened in the beginning. And I was watching it with a friend and her 2-year-old.
Oh.
And that part got very, very dark, and she was into it. And we were like, "Oh no, what have we done?"
Well, I mean, do you want to go around and just kind of describe other than rewatching this time? What was the first time? What was your memory of watching it for the first time? Because this is such a iconic, there's no way to think about space movies and not think about 2001 in some capacity. Matt, do you want to go first?
Sure, because I think I have maybe the least amount to say. I watched it once in college after a party. So I was not in all of my regular.
Although they do say I'm not encouraging this at all. Taking drugs is the way to watch this movie.
Now I have a thing about that too. We'll get to that eventually, but I remember watching this because all of my friends because I hadn't seen it before college, and they were like, "This is a super important film if you're into science fiction or just sort of deeper meaning film." And I watched it, and I was like, "I get it. Like I get why people have this. The visuals and the technical side of it is what sort of grabbed me way more than the meanings behind the things, which I think are deep. But because it is such a, I guess, choose your own adventure in what the meaning actually is. I tend to not gravitate towards films a lot like that, and if they're made very well, like this film is, I'll latch on to the more technical side of things. So I just remember being like, this was made this year, this was made, and they were able to do this, and they kind of guessed a lot of, like, at least from my limited experience, like how a ship might land on a planet, and like all the very sort of minutia of the technology behind it, how an artificial intelligence would interact and have to deal with issues that it has based on conflicts in data points it's getting. That's the stuff that grabbed me. But I remember sort of being like, it's too nebulous and it's too long.
Okay.
And that, I know that is not a popular opinion, but from anyone. And so I think that's another reason why I hadn't watched it up until yesterday again.
Okay.
So that's me. I'll back off and I'll hand in my nerd card right now.
Jana, how about yourself?
Yeah, I watched it when I was very young.
Yeah.
So I don't know, must have been around 12. And I didn't get it.
Yeah.
I thought it was really, really slow.
Yeah.
You know, I liked that it was set in space because I was into that.
Yeah.
But I think I just missed the entire point of the movie. And I hadn't watched it again until very recently, and I'm so glad that I did, because it was a completely different experience for me.
Okay. I think I kind of touched on what my experience was. You know, again, I saw it that first time, but I think I was sort of slightly fortunate, which is that I didn't watch it on VHS or DVD or anything like that. I actually went to the theater and I saw it a 70 millimeter projection of it, and I think again, I think I'm with you guys on that in that sense that it did leave me kind of perplexed. And I wasn't sure what to make of it, but it definitely made an impression on me. And then I found myself kind of like a week later wanting to revisit it. And I did. And I watched it again on DVD, pretty soon after. And I've come to... It's not a movie I loved the first time. It's not even my favorite Stanley Kubrick movie, but it's a film that I've come to love over time and love a lot over time. And I do watch it regularly. When I got a projector in my apartment, it was the first thing I threw up on the projector. In researching for this episode, I reached out to all of our listeners. But by the way, if you are a listener and you wanted to reach us and with your thoughts on 2001: A Space Odyssey, you can email us in at onlymoviepodcast@gmail.com or hit us up on Twitter at onlymoviepod. We should have said that earlier.
Yeah, we didn't do the housekeeping. We were too excited.
We're too excited to jump in because we have an astronomer in the room, and I apologize that we haven't asked you. We're going to get specific about it, but
we have an astronomer in the room, and we're asking her Star Wars questions.
Exactly. But I started reaching out to as many people as I could about, what their impressions of 2001 were, and basically the same question you used, like, what do people think of this? Because it is such a sort of enigmatic film. It's such a film that, divides people that you really have to bring a lot of yourself to the movie. And I found a person who had actually seen 2001 in the theater and in 1968. And I got him to email us in. This is Brent from Pennsylvania. And he wrote us in and said that seeing 2001: A Space Odyssey as a 10-year-old during its first run in the spring of 1968 made a lifelong impression on me. It was rated G, and I was very interested in space and rockets. This was in the era when we stopped to class to watch rocket launches on a TV wheeled into the cafeteria. And I got my dad to take me, and I don't think either of us knew what to expect. There were no endless trailers on TV promoting things, just small ads in newspapers. And as you know, at 2.5 hours, the movie is long by today's standards for a G-rated movie. It was long enough to have an intermission, which I wish some longer movies today would bring back. We saw the movie in a large theater by today's standards. Theaters had not created small screens with 100 seats or less in multiplexes. The theater was mostly empty, as I recall, probably because my dad took me to a matinee. And then he goes on to describe the actual experience of watching the movie, which I'll just paraphrase here. But when Hal tells Dave that he can't let him back in, I remember my dad snickered. He had a wicked sense of humor. Once the final chapter began, I was fascinated but totally lost, as most are to this day. I knew I was seeing something that had meaning, but I couldn't figure it out. And in our discussion after the movie, I was sort of relieved that my dad was also confused. But we both agreed that it was spectacular to watch. We did get that the monolith was advancing civilization somehow, and I later read Arthur C. Clarke's novel to get a better understanding of what I saw. He goes on to mention that that experience started a lifelong love of movies with him. I don't think Brent is a filmmaker, although he talked a lot about buying high-end film gear so he could really enjoy the experience. And he does watch the movie once every year.
Thank you, Brent.
Yeah, thank you, Brent. Thanks for emailing us.
I always I like seeing like people's first experiences with the stuff we're talking, especially like in
1968.
That's great.
And so I think one of the important things with 2001 as well is to remember 1968, which predates the first landing on the moon and predates photos of Earth from the moon. So even the first image in 2001 is an entirely imagined image of Earth. Is that?
Yeah, and I think it's amazing. It's shocking to me, and I didn't appreciate this obviously when I first saw it. Is how good it is at getting the feel of those images that would come later. And so we can also talk about this later on. But like those scenes at Jupiter and the scenes of the Earth and the moon are just I think they capture what the real photos capture.
Right. So
so I was going to say, I really dug, and this is something I didn't pick up on the first time, but I think it took seeing so much space stuff that we see. I mean, even Star Wars Guardians, like you have these beautiful images of planets and very like crisp, clear things where you see like cloud formations and you can see some of the terrain and all that stuff. But like, I really liked in this film, in a way, the planet shots or from the moon or from wherever we're going felt a little bit more real than these super crisp, zany color versions, because there's one big light source. It's probably real far away, and it's just from the angle that these things were shot, and even beyond a sort of symmetry or geometrical like satisfying thing, the way they were a little bit like, I don't want to say overblown or blurry, but it felt to me like I was looking at a thing that was difficult to look at, and that made it feel more real to me.
Yeah.
If I'm not saying it correctly, but it's the contrast to our polished space stuff now and the way this was made and the way this was showed to us. I really liked it.
Yeah, I feel like there's a starkness and also like a high contrast feel that really kind of dazzles you and is not what you're expecting, especially if you haven't seen it before.
So, now that you are, like since your Star Wars day and now watching 2001 as an adult, I'm curious what you think about, I guess maybe even a broad topic, how space is represented in film. How do you feel like, what do you think movies get right and what do you think movies get so wrong?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely pick up on a lot of accuracy things. So a huge one, obviously, is sound in space. And I understand why it's done. Like, it's so hard to have silence for long periods of time. This movie's more comfortable with it, I think, than others.
Very much so.
And what I really liked about what they did was they did have sounds, but for example, when he's traveling in the pod, you hear the sounds that would be heard inside of his suit. So you hear his breathing, and you have shots both from within the pod and outside of the pod. Both of them have the breathing sound, which obviously if you were outside from a perspective there, you wouldn't be able to hear it. But it really, for me, it's different than what you expect, and that gives it a sense of realism.
Yeah. So and I think one of the issue there is that sound has no vacuum. It is entirely in a vacuum, so there's no media for it to travel through.
That's right. So you get those pressure variations that are hitting your eardrum in space. In the vacuum, you don't have a medium through which those pressure waves can travel, and so you wouldn't be able to hear it. You would be able to hear things, if you could survive without a suit, for example, which you can't.
Yeah.
But if you were on the surface of a planet with an atmosphere, there would be sound that could be transmitted through that or through liquids, whether it's water or, if you have liquid hydrocarbons on, the surface, you could listen through that.
One sidestep here. So since, there's been a ton of movies about space travel, obviously in the sort of fantasy realm, things like Avengers and Infinity War. By the way, your book actually really helped me during a scene during Infinity War, because there's a major scene that happens on Titan, and I just read your chapter about Titan. And so I was kind of, there's a scene This is a sidestep for Avengers.
Here we go.
Infinity
I
War.
love that you're making an Avengers aside.
But there was a scene where one character is jumping up on Titan, and I was like, oh, I know why that happens. I know why she's doing that, because the gravity on Titan allows you to do that. And it was just through your book that helped me through that. Although I was wondering why everyone could breathe on Titan was kind of odd to me.
I haven't seen it yet.
Yeah, don't worry. I'm not a spoiler. But I'm like, obviously this film's like Contact, Mission to Mars, Gravity. Has anything, kind of grabbed you recently? NASA just did a poll of their favorite space movies and the movies that they really hate about space. I wonder if you have any opinions about movies that, you kind of love that are just generally about space.
Yeah, I really loved Contact because it was also one of those movies that inspired me. Yeah. And I think that, it's the most realistic portrayal of an astronomer. Although she does do things like put on headphones and listen to the radio emissions, which, radio, totally different than sound.
Yeah.
No astronomer would ever do that.
Okay.
But we'll forgive it.
It's fine.
But I think, her personality and her worldview and the way, she interacts, and even things down to like the cabin that they went to at the large radio telescope looks exactly like the actual cabin that's there, that observers stay in.
Yeah, so Contact is the Robert Zemeckis film with Jodie Foster, who plays someone who's researching Yeti.
SETI,
Yetis are very different.
Define the acronym. Sorry, it's
search for extraterrestrial intelligence.
Yeah, not yelling for extraterrestrial.
No. Well, it could be. We could try that too.
Yeah. So she's Jodie Foster plays a radio astronomer that detects. Spoiler alert.
Yeah.
Hopefully you've seen it by now.
Yeah.
She detects a signal from an alien intelligence.
Okay, and.
I was going to say the example you use of like no astronomer would sit and put on headphones and listen to that's the kind of thing that when a movie works for you, no matter what knowledge you have of sort of the actual accuracy or science behind it, the emotion that character is feeling is real enough where the activity that is getting them there, because it just needs to look or feel visually more stimulating than what an actual astronomer might be doing. That I love it when the feeling a film creates can transcend and you can forgive the moments of inaccuracy, and Contact is definitely one of those.
Exactly. And it also does a great job of capturing the excitement of discovery, I feel like.
Yeah.
And so in that sense, that's why it's, I would say it's one of kind of my favorite actual astronomer, portraying an astronomer.
Yeah.
Okay. And
what about your least favorite?
Yeah, what's your least
movie?
favorite? Yeah.
I don't know.
Or something that just when you watched it, you're like,
I'm trying to think of something I hated. I usually don't watch it unless I'm pretty sure it won't completely annoy me.
Can I tell you what NASA hated?
Yeah, tell me what NASA hated.
NASA astronomers were unanimously opposed to, and I was really surprised because I love this movie, was Alfonso Cuarón's Gravity.
They didn't like it?
Yeah, and it was weird because then I started reading the comments, and it was things like seeing Sandra Bullock float in space without a suit on, not in space, but inside her, inside the actual station, and it was things like that, and then the amount of sound that they heard in space. I think it becomes one of those things where you like the movie, but you dislike what it kind of represents, maybe?
Yeah, the interesting thing for me, I thought Gravity did a couple things really well.
Yeah.
So there's a certain scene where she's tethered and she's moving around, and the space station is kind of being, is in disarray. And I thought it did a really good job of portraying the confusing physics of being tethered in a microgravity environment. And that's a difficult thing kind of to wrap your brain around. And I think that, you look at that and you kind of like you get it, right?
Yeah.
And so there were, there's a lot of like little things that are inaccurate about it. Like she moves between, I think the Hubble Space Telescope and the International Space Station, and they're not in remotely the same orbits.
Right.
Maybe it's some future where they've moved them. I don't know. But I think there's a lot of things that Gravity did well.
Yeah. And I think it's also kind of maybe sometimes there's a thing where it's aspirational as opposed to realistic. I think the movie that NASA scientists did love was The Martian.
Yeah.
Because The Martian was kind of like space survival, like I'm going to science the shit out of this.
Yeah,
Right.
absolutely.
And
of course, the Cloverfield paradox.
Yeah,
I'm sure
they
they
love the
absolutely
Cloverfield
loved.
paradox.
They thought that was a pinnacle of scientific accuracy and function. I have an idea about why Gravity might have been one that they didn't like as well. Is Gravity and the production behind Gravity made it very clear in their advertising and how they sort of put the idea of the film out that this was going to be a highly accurate science fiction depiction of these sort of and obviously it can't be perfect, but when you put your cards down and be like accuracy, then everyone's going to come out of the woodwork and be like every glasses is going to be pushed up and be like, you know what, hold on, this like, so if you set your foundation on quote accuracy, people will come with sledgehammers. If you put it in, if you don't do that, I bet you there's a little bit more forgiveness. So I can see why Naz would be like, listen, everybody, just sit down for a second.
Well, with that in mind, I want to take us back to 1968 and the 4 years before 1968 to kind of set the stage for 2001 a little bit. Stanley, another reason that 2001 kind of gets exalted into popular culture, is not least of which is that it's made by Stanley Kubrick, one of the great artist in almost any medium of our time, but notably a film director, noted as one of the greats of the 20th century. And in 1964, right, coming off the heels of Dr. Strangelove, he decided he wanted to make a science fiction film. And in his words, he wanted to make a really good science fiction film. Because up until that point, you had sort of things like Journey to Another Planet or something like that, or movies that kind of like treated space almost as a horror medium. It was like the haunted house down the street, and space was just that version of it. And he was really obsessed and meticulous about wanting to depict space as accurately as possible, even to the point of hiring NASA scientists to work on the film, which was something kind of unprecedented at the time, and hiring Arthur C. Clarke to write the script. And Arthur C. Clarke is actually an astronomer, or is actually a mathematician as well. So he has sort of a major history in actually understanding the science as well as being a fictional writer. And they did this unusual thing, which was that they wrote the screenplay and the book at the same time. Because Kubrick kind of hated the screenplay format, and he was like, this film shouldn't be about following the rules of filmmaking. It should be about following the rules of science and space. And then an interesting thing happened, which was that the book and the film kind of diverged in two different paths. The book essentially explains everything that's happening in the movie with kind of direct monologues about the monolith does this. You see this when you go through the door. This is what happens when you go into space. And even the final act of the film, which is mostly hallucinogenic and feels like a mushroom trip, the book actually goes on to explain exactly what's happening in that sequence. So, and Kubrick then, kind of actually had the film with voiceover explaining it. So when we see the bone flying up into the sky that becomes a spacecraft, there was actually a voiceover that explained exactly what was happening. And it was like, man had discovered tool, but the greatest tools were yet to come. And these two, and they do go on to say the tools became weapons. And Kubrick kind of decided halfway through, as he was editing the film, I'm going to take all of that out, and I'm going to turn this into a film where we want to use the visual language of cinema more than we want to use the written word to explain everything. We want to make sure that everybody who's watching this basically has to interpret it, and there is no interpretation that is wrong, and there is no interpretation that is finite in this film. And I'm curious with both of you, we talked a little about the technical side of the film, but what does this film mean? What is actually what do we get out of this movie? Matt, do you want to go first?
Jen, I'm gonna tag you in. I'm not doing this first.
I think, yeah, it's what I was getting from it is that it's telling a story of a development of intelligence. And what I love about it is you're talking about how it's using the visual language. It's definitely zooming out, right? It's telling a story that's even larger than human history, right?
Yeah.
And it's like larger than language to explain it, right?
Yeah.
It's using something for more fundamental, I think,
Yeah.
than, an explanation, which would have been a completely different movie. And I think that's really part of what makes it so special, is that it gives you that space there to interpret it yourself. But I definitely am connecting it to this larger development of humanity, and even beyond humanity or before humanity, just putting in context, in this grand context, what it is to be human, what it is to be, conscious and sentient, and evolving.
It does that a couple of ways. One way is absolutely fantastical. It introduces this object, this sort of foreign,
the monolith.
this alien object, this monolith, which is a pure. It's an invention of pure science fiction, and it's such a striking invention as well, because it is nothing like, say, a viewer in 2018 would interpret an advanced technological object. It's entirely devoid of almost any visual technological paradigm that we would understand, and it's sort of this clear block. And then the second one is this almost in a way, and I think this relates to your work now. Is the depiction of hell, which is a sort of an intermediary step between humanity and I'm going to borrow from Nietzsche here, but the Übermensch, which is what the Star Child kind of relates to, and I do that because he uses a particular music track to suggest that. But I was curious. Oh, Matt, you wanted to jump in about.
I'm making lots of faces and hands about the monolith, so I apologize. I think the monolith is I think the monolith and what I believe the monolith represents is done so perfectly in this film, because the monolith, you could look at this from, so I don't think what the monolith represents, I think, is even outside of science fiction in general. The monolith represents either a tool of God or some sort of force that drives in this case humanity, right? And I'm sure it's driven other things. I mean, you could look at what films that have done this far worse, like Prometheus, but you could, I like this film's depiction of that because, and without getting too much into religion or too much into even the logic behind the science of there's most likely something better than us out there, this simple rectangular onyx-looking slab is so both striking and simple that you can really put any interpretation of what you believe, whether that's religious, whether that's scientific, logic, like whatever, mathematical, you can put your own, I guess, onus on what that monolith represents. And yeah, it's the thing that causes all of the jumps that we do. Like you can tie almost any origin story and pretty much make it make sense with that piece of stone or whatever that thing is. And I thought that was a masterstroke in either script writing or filmmaking, because that's going to make your audience in a very out there sort of film. That's something that I think every viewer, no matter what your background, can latch onto. You see that, you hear the music cues, you're like, that's something bigger than us, and that's something that I think is 100% wonderful, and probably my favorite aspect of this entire film.
Yeah, I think it evokes this strong sense of wonder and awe and almost, edging on fear.
Yeah.
And I think, that's the feeling you get when you're thinking about these ideas of how this happens, how you become conscious, how, you evolve to be a different being. And so yeah, I really, I was feeling those things strongly as I was watching it, and having those emotions come up as you're kind of intellectually thinking about that process too, was a really special experience.
Yeah.
And what did you think about Hal? I mean, because Hal, almost one of the things that the movie does really well as well is repeated motifs, and Hal almost has this sort of monolithic shape. He's this upward rectangular shape with a red dot in the middle of it. But not beyond that, he's a kind of some sort of evolutionary leap as well, because he we start pondering the question of his consciousness. And I was curious what you thought about that.
I was astonished that it came so early, right?
Yeah, 1968.
Because, I mean, this is a time, if you look at the context, right? Computers are these huge, like, room-sized things that are so much less powerful than, you know, all of the computers that we have today. And I think that there's more and more anxiety because we are still learning how to relate to you know, artificial intelligence, to these, you know, algorithms that are strangely good at some things and strangely bad at others,
right.
and how that's changing our world, right? And that's this huge thing we're dealing with in society, and yet here we are, you know, in the late 60s, contemplating what that's going to be.
And I think that's part of a contemplation that even NASA scientists weren't considering at that point, right? Like it's not something that they were thinking about for a trip to the moon. This is well beyond the reach of, if you were to say, I want to make a space movie in 1968, you know, goes into. And Hal is oddly the most human character in the movie as well. He seems to be the most affected by you know, the things that are happening around him. Everyone else is sort of a little bit cold and detached, and their interactions are slightly, you know, like devoid of human empathy. Yet he is the one that is emotional and that makes a decision that is strikingly human, you know, in sort of the self-survival mode. And his death scene is kind of the most oddly affecting. As he's kind of like he's slowly losing his intelligence and his capacity. I was like, I'm feeling really bad for Hal at this point. I'm feeling really affected by Hal's passing. And it's something, again, that is so striking, again, when you think about the context, you know, like 1968.
Yeah, I feel like, you know, Hal is kind of inheriting the flaws of humans.
Yeah.
And also I found that the death scene really, really eerie, especially because that was the lullaby I was sung when I was a child.
Oh, yeah. No.
And so it gives me chills, right? Because it's like this, I don't know, it's like tied back.
I liked every time you know, he's singing the song, and I'm a sucker for when the computer dies. And every time it couldn't get any slower or deeper, it did, and then until it was just like a weird, ominous like bass line, and I was like, oh no. I think Hal is the only character I saw outside of the apes that experience any actual, that you see either in dialogue or feel sort of in how it is, it says something, any emotion whatsoever. Even when in the second act, when the guy who goes to the base before he goes to the moon, Dr. Floyd, when he calls home to the daughter, I was like, what? I didn't buy any of it. Like, everything in that scene of that video call felt so robotic. And then the first time I actually felt like any emotion from any character that spoke English whatsoever in this film was when Hal asked either David or the other doctor, you know, how are you feeling about the mission? Are you worried at all? Or like, it basically brought up the first doubt of anything, because its programming is obviously starting to conflict with itself. That was the point where I was like, oh, there's something that's alive. Like, nothing else felt like, I mean, obviously they're alive. There are people walking around, but like emotionally connected at all. So, and then obviously when Hal does what Hal does, I connect. I don't know. It's that I connect with Hal more in a weird way. And I don't know if, I mean, I'm sure it was on purpose. I wish every time I watch this movie, which has been 2 or 3 times at this point, I'm shocked how much I'm like, yeah, Hal, like you got to do it. I mean, I get it. I don't know.
Yeah, and I think there's this idea, you know, thinking about how, you know, human society would evolve, that people get more rational, that we're kind of like, that we can like rise above these passions that, you know, cause us to fight each other and kill each other with bones and things like that. And I think, you know, part of what it's saying is you can't really get away from that. Yeah,
even in our evolution, in some sort of evolutionary leap, which Hal clearly represents, he retains the kind of, as you said, the flaws of humanity. So, side note, coming back to Dr. Floyd on the moon as well, I think there's 2 things to think about there. One is that, like, yes, you could take this sort of philosophical reasoning about, humanity kind of evolving away from emotional thinking into more rationalized thought, which means that all our interactions become suddenly cold and detached and kind of transactional in a way.
My favorite.
Yeah, which is, basically how I live my life. But the other thing is the remarkable thing, if we think again about something that I think the second act of this movie does really profoundly, and the film is broken up into 4 acts, and the second act is a trip to the moon. Is the second act opens with this dance, the Blue Danube, with a spaceship kind of like docking into an orbiting station, and it's done with this sort of playful glee by playing this Blue Danube song. And I think one of the things that we're experiencing there is the joy of space travel, and the joy of space travel with Dr. Floyd. The thing that those scenes showcase that, again, 1968, we have to think about is a Skype call. 1968, a video call. It almost doesn't matter. I think, again, thinking back to Brent's email, seeing this in 1968 in a movie matinee theater, it almost doesn't matter what's happening in the call. What's important is the call, is this video call back to Earth. And I love that the film is kind of peppered with like odd amounts of detail in that call, which is like it's an AT&T or Bell line call. It costs a certain amount of credits.
$1.72.
Yeah, $1.72 that he has to insert in. And then also the other thing is like the immigration process into the moon, where it's like you have to voice activate. Like, again, thinking about the context, it's like the call, he's just calling his kid just to say, hey, I'm sorry, I'm going to miss your birthday. There's that weird line when she says, I'd like a Bush baby. And you're like, oh, what does that mean? Like, what is that toy?
I was thinking maybe it was an off-brand Cabbage Patch Kid, but I don't know. I don't know.
It also might relate, like the sort of mirroring effect, where it might relate to kind of the apes that we saw in Africa before as well, like a toy that kind of, it's a symbol of like, a major evolutionary leap that has now become a commodity. Maybe. That's one way to think about it. Or
it's a throwaway line.
Yeah, and the technology, I think, some of it seems very natural to us, which I think is shocking, right?
Yeah.
Like the video call, the voice interface with how
the credit card.
Yeah, it's all just a part of our world now. We don't think of it as future. We think of it as present.
Yeah.
But I really found an interesting contrast between the technology, which I thought was so well projected into the future, and the fact that you're sending the past, like you're sending the 60s culturally to Jupiter, right? Like there's only guys there, like the way the family interact, like there's so many cultural things that are so deeply in the past.
There's only white guys there.
Yeah.
And even again, the spaceship, when it's empty and it's flying to the space station, the stewardess walking or the flight attendant with the grip boots, and just sort of like this weird like idea of 60s luxury while it was going on. It felt very like I think watching it back then, this is all highly effective. I think watching it in 2018, I was a little like, while that, again, the technical filmmaking aspect was great, I was like, I don't know, like a lot of it felt wrong. Now, again, that's just a sign of the times. That's not there's no way the filmmaker Kubrick at the time, I can't blame him for that. It's just now, and especially it's exacerbated by how long all of the shots actually are. And I get the operatic pacing of it, but when you put those two things together for me, I will say between those moments, I was just like, come on, let's just, I get it. But again, that's just a time moving on into the future thing.
Well, with that in mind, I mean, how did I think one of the criticisms that's been held at this film is that it's boring. I mean, James Cameron was talking about, he was just talking about it this last week, I think, in some press interviews for his new show.
Talking a lot.
Yeah, he does. But he was talking about how he loves the movie, but it has, excuse my French, but he says the film has no emotional balls. and in fact, a Russian filmmaker at the time, Andrei Tarkovsky, saw the film and said the exact same thing. And he made a film years later called Solaris, which he basically, it's almost a Russian version of 2001. But he was like, I want to make this an emotional emotionally resonant experience. And so I'm curious about, like your responses to that, like whether you thought the film was boring. And what I'm doubly curious about is you had a 2-year-old watching with you and what they thought of the film.
She was enraptured and I was shocked, right?
Yeah.
She really, she was just identifying the moon and identifying the Earth. And her mom is really into space too. Well, she's my co-author, Olivia Koski, on the book. And so she really was into it and was compelled by it. And I think actually those long shots are something that, a 2-year-old can kind of absorb. But I think, the pacing of the film I found was kind of the medium reflecting the message, because in some ways that's what space travel really is like waiting around and everything, in lower gravity things, humans move slower, and that's just a natural reflection of the environment. And I think that's what the movie is tapping into.
And it's not and I mean, one thing, so just to my opinion is I definitely felt the length of it the first time I saw it. But the thing to note is the movie's 2 hours and 20 minutes long, which isn't that long. Like,
it's not.
Infinity War is 20 minutes longer than this thing.
Sure.
And you know what I mean? So
but it feels snappy.
But I think the thing is, I was struck by watching it this time is actually how quick it moves. And I was struck by, because I knew that there are, I guess now it's this thing whereas I know what the 4 acts are. And I was surprised by how quickly it jumps for those 4 acts really, really, really efficiently. And it does things by, there's that magisterial cut that is almost, it seems so simple now, but it's such an extraordinary cut is the evolutionary leap that the film takes from bone to space travel. And I've shown this film to my 2-year-old as well. And but I've done this thing. I'm very cautious with my 2-year-old about showing violence on screen. So I'll jump over the monkeys hitting each other because I don't want them to hit me. But that I'm always surprised by how transfixed he is by that cut. He'll jump up and up and down about that cut, and then the scenes of them going into the space station, he's absolutely transfixed by it. And I remember I showed him that the whole Blue Danube scene and the stewardess walking around. And the next day we visited an aquarium which had like a porthole circular window to look in, and he started trying to climb it like the stewardess did. He started to try and do the upside down thing. So I think that like comes to this thing that Kubrick was saying, which was that he Dr. Strangelove, the film that immediately predates this, he said is a film which is its impact is hinged on its dialogue, the mode of expression, the euphemisms employed. And he said 2001, on the other hand, is basically a visual, non-verbal experience. It avoids intellectual verbalization and reaches the viewer's subconscious in a way that is essentially poetic and philosophic. And he says that, he goes on in that quote to describe the fact that he wants people who are astronomers to be able to respond to this film, but also people who have no experience to just bathe in the wonder of it. And he does that visually. And I think one of the things he talks about, like as that quote comes to an end, is that he thinks that this is the thing that movies are kind of missing, is this visual splendor that is purely something only cinema can do. And he said with this film he really wanted to get into that. And the things in this film that really profoundly excite me now, maybe as I get older, one of them is like the floating pen. That thing is amazing. Cool. And have you ever heard of how they did that? Because I'm curious. Yeah, you think about now visual effects. How would you do a floating pin? You do a CGI pin. And the thing about that scene is that you've got a character walking towards the pin and it's floating, which is like, how are we going to do this entirely optically? And she plucks it out of the air. And so you're like, wait, how does this even work? Mm-hmm. And have you guys ever heard the story of how this was done?
No.
Sellotape. They built a giant rig with clear plastic sellotape and stuck the pin to it. And they used this they had to get, I think it was 3M or some other manufacturer of sellotape to give them like the special kind that they could basically rip off right before the filming, so it doesn't accumulate dust. and then they just rotated it. They had two grips on either side, just rotating it in the air.
And she plucks it off that.
And she plucks it off that, and which is how you can see through it, how you can have people interact with it.
Wow.
That's genius.
Yeah,
that's that's the kind of like visual invention that just it blows my mind more than almost anything CGI that I could think of.
Yeah, and I love the tiny details like when it zooms in on the grip boots.
Yeah.
And things like that. And also, I felt like because it was made before you could, do the imagery with computers, a lot of it was done with models, and you get the illumination right.
Yeah.
So if you actually have a light source and it's far enough away so that the light rays are coming out parallel, and you have, representations of planets and moons, they're illuminated in a way that's correct.
And casting shadows.
Yeah, casting shadows. And that's something that if you're making it by hand with a computer, it's really easy to mess up if you don't think about what you're doing.
Yeah, that space docking sequence is extraordinary. And I think the thing that I'm always amazed by is how real it looks, and yeah, like it casts shadows, and you see the light kind of interplay with itself, and then again, Kubrick being the master filmmaker, I know you kind of talked about it being slow, but he's moving the camera so precisely, and it is this wonderful dance between the objects and the camera, and it's so delightful, and like you said, 2-year-olds just love it. And I kind of like, I guess I'm in this stage now where I'm like thinking about how delightful that sequence is.
So I have a couple theories on both 2-year-olds watching this film and the way that sort of adults sort of watch it now. I think, and how one of the quotes you had said, Shahir, was about how cinema's missing a lot of the stuff that this film does, current day cinema. I agree with that, but I also want to be cautious of saying that entirely, because I do think while a lot of our big, blockbuster, knockdown, drag out, kind of like silly bullshit movies don't do enough under the hood to make them matter. I want elements of the skill and the craft and the meaning of 2001, and I want my other elements too, and I want them together for this day and age, because I feel like for this is a weird thing to say, and I guess I will represent a common 2018 just going to the movies for fun kind of not think too heavily about a thing, which you can have fun doing both. I think a 2-year-old child can watch this and be enamored by it because it is a pure emotional experience, and they won't feel bored or like they're wasting any time, because their concept of boredom and time wasting isn't actually like there yet. They haven't experienced enough media to really get that. I feel like, and it's the same thing. You are what you eat, or whatever you want to put it like that. Like I digest visually a bunch of films, both heady and stupid, YouTube videos all over the damn place. Like I watch a lot of stuff, so I outside of my own head as best as I can witness myself, my attention span changing, and not necessarily getting shorter, but the way I need interspersed things to keep me engaged, I've noticed has gotten smaller in novels I read and everything. And that's good and bad depending on if you value speed or content. And that's a whole nother discussion. But I think the reason why now today I feel like this goes too slow is because I feel like, and especially even coming from an editing and a television production sort of background, is I can, and this is going to be a weird statement, I feel like I know the techniques now where I could get not 100% of the emotional weight in that time period. I could probably get like 90% of that emotional weight in a quicker span of time. And it's what you value based on what you're trying to portray in the time frame in which you're trying to portray it. I feel like checks and balances. The emotional depth you get, the value of it versus the time spent getting there. For me personally, I feel like you could change those sliders a little bit differently and still have an incredibly engaging experience much quicker. It's again, it's not saying, I think that's a combination of those two things, from the time period it was made and the time and today's sort of fast-paced media environment. Like that's where I'm coming from in that. Now, if I was to, I could also see myself being in a mood where I'm like, I need some esoteric like really like thought deep dive, like I'm going to sit and just sort of melt into a film. This is an amazing film to do that with. Personally, I rarely get in those moods. I have, and I have watched things like this in the past. I'll also I feel like in a weird way, and again, completely different genre, Fantasia is sort of the same type of
Disney film.
The Disney film, but it's the same sort of like. It's a lot of dust floating around for a lot of times, and it's orchestral, and like you really get involved in the music, and so it's just it's a genre of film that I don't think would survive today, but I want aspects of it that I find important and meaningful to sort of. I want more of this mixed in with current stuff. I don't think I want like another one of the like a super long because I don't think it would stand. That's a weird long mix.
Well, how do you feel about the boredom factor?
Well, as you were talking, I was thinking about. So, I used to work at the American Museum of Natural History, and they have the planetarium show there. And I was thinking about what you're allowed to get away with in a planetarium show in terms of just focusing on the visuals and like letting people kind of absorb what they're seeing and kind of understand it. And I think you can get away with more there, and that lets you do some really amazing things that can bring you into the space environment. And I think, this is kind of in between what you would expect from, a normal pace of a modern movie and that kind of planetarium experience where you're just kind of immersed and allowed to just exist slowly in a place.
Yeah.
Yeah, and there are movies today that either draw influence from 2001 or will have that sort of. I'm not sure what the style is we're discussing here, but I think it comes down to this this sort of cinematic style, which is I think a visual. Where an emphasis on visual information as opposed to auditory information, I think, is probably one way to think about it. It's not necessarily encompassing it all, but a film like Under the Skin, the Jonathan Glazer film, which came out a couple of years ago, kind of really feels like 2000, like a film Kubrick would make today, and I think it absolutely holds up. So we obviously have different tastes about this, but the thing is though, upon rewatching it, I was not only was I kind of struck by how briskly it goes, and again, I've seen it many times, so maybe I'm kind of expecting that, but also how you kind of get 4 movies in one here, and all 4 are very different things, and I think that kept my interest going in sort of odd ways. So the first is the sort of like almost Richard Attenborough style, nature documentary, which I found absolutely fascinating, not only for the technical things, because again, this was shot entirely in a studio,
which you can tell that was, if I have to pick one visualization thing apart from this film, is when you contrast the amazing space photography, basically, or video or cinematography, with this. Especially when you watch it on a Blu-ray and it's super clear and like all this stuff. Maybe it's the transfer that gives it away. I don't know. But you like see the foreground rocks and you just see backdrop painting. And it didn't take me out of it. But when you put it in contrast with the rest of it, and it's the times it was made, and you could also see really where they wanted to focus. You only have so much money in production and time and etc.
I'm going to just go out on a limb here and say I actually thought it was extraordinary, that opening sequence and the way it was filmed was extraordinary, because it reminds me of something at the American Museum of Natural History, which is the dioramas. And I remember the first time I went to the dioramas, and I'm sort of an amateur photographer, and I snuck in with my camera and tripod. So I set up some like shots there.
Not even a monopod, you bad boy.
No, I took a full tripod in, and I was just like, and I had a friend with me, and we started taking photos in front of the dioramas, and I was struck by what an extraordinary technique that was. And the thing about that opening sequence is it's done not with matte paintings, it's done with rear projection. So the way it's actually done is it's a giant screen with film that they've shot in Africa projecting back on the actors. And the extraordinary thing I thought about that is, unlike, say, green screen compositing right now, is the lighting is embedded. So you immediately get this lighting that reflects exactly what's happening with the actors. And of course, they used mime actors to do the monkeys. So I thought it was just extraordinary. And rewatching it, I was just struck struck by how effective it was. Like, I really believed it. And then you have these scenes where like a leopard, and it's genuinely a leopard,
That's so cool,
attacks one of the mines, and you kind of like cognitively know it's an actor in a suit, but it attacks, and you're, and like I'm kind of like, even now watching, I'm like, oh my God. And then they put they had the leopard eating a zebra as well. So I don't know. I found
part in the dead zebra.
Yeah, I found that whole sequence really extraordinary, and really, I was kind of like, why aren't we doing this now? Because this is a way to do it that like kind of mitigates all the problems that we have with green screen.
I think it still reads, especially, and it might have to do with the transfer, it still reads flatter. Now, granted, green screen compositing, 80% of what we see is pretty rough. Like, it's not, I'm always shocked. It's more shocking to me when I see a green screen composite that I'm like, I know that can't be real, but it's working. Yeah. This to me, it just, and again, I think it's I would love to see a film like a 35 millimeter or whatever, or they're doing the 70. Is that what's happening?
They're doing 70 millimeter.
I want to see that, because I want to see how that rear projection does with that transfer as opposed to a digital. Because I do think there's something with either contrast ratio, we sort of brought up before. There's something that made it feel flat and matte-ish to me. I'm interested in the technique you're describing. I would love to see what we could do with that sort of back projection stuff today, because I bet you it's nuts. I don't know. We're getting into the weeds here, and we should move on.
Yeah. So so we've got that interesting trip to Africa at the beginning. We've got the second sort of beautiful dance of space with Dr. Floyd going to the moon. The third act with Hal kind of is the closest that I think you have to an action movie, with Dr. Bowman trying to rescue Hal. I thought that was kind of an extraordinary sequence, and I remember seeing that in the theater for the first time, and the silence is what struck me. And then the fourth sequence, this is I really want to touch on this sequence a lot, because I think it actually goes again into your book a little bit, because the journey, it's obviously psychedelic in some way. Like the famous story is John Lennon had a sitting, he bought a sitting ticket for this film for an entire year, and he apparently would go in after concerts and stuff, and he was just like, I just want to zone out and watch this movie. And the interesting, just side note about this movie, is it actually didn't do that well. If you hear Brent talking about like it was a mostly empty theater, but what started happening is that hippies started going to the movies and started dropping acid, and apparently there's this thing where you could time the acid just right so that as soon as you got to the landing on Jupiter, the acid would kick in, and that's what actually made the movie survive. And it made, it cost $10 million, and it made, I think, in the vicinity of $40 million because of hippies going to the movie to like drop acid and watch the movie.
Thanks, hallucinogens.
Yeah, I'm curious, because essentially what happens in this fourth act is Bowman, he pushes through the threat of Hal, and he travels to Jupiter. And the monolith is there on Jupiter. But I was reading your book and your chapter on Jupiter and the gaseous planet and how to what the impression of traveling through into the Jupiter atmosphere might be like. And I wondered what you think about the way it's represented in this film, both in terms of the slit screens technique, the sort of lights flying at you, but also when it's kind of like flying across Jupiter and you get these weird planets and this weird feeling. I wonder what you thought about it.
Yeah. Going back to kind of the approach to Jupiter, the image of Jupiter at that time, we only had images that were based on Earth, so telescopes looking at Jupiter.
Right.
Since then, there have been many probes that have either flown by or orbited around Jupiter that have, so our understanding of how Jupiter appears has changed very dramatically. And even now it's changing. So there's a probe, it was launched in 2011, and
is that New Horizons?
This one's Juno. So there's also New Horizons was the one that flew by Pluto.
Yeah.
This is the Juno spacecraft, which is now in orbit around Jupiter, and it's in an orbit which allows it to see the pole regions of Jupiter, and it's completely changed our picture. So you can think of Jupiter, you might think of it with these bands and zones, so kind of like stripes across it.
Yeah.
With the great red spot being the storm, but if you look at these pictures that are coming back recently from Juno, it's completely amazing. So you have these swirling clouds.
Yeah.
It looks like, all these fluid dynamics. I mean, it's really like, it's really quite amazing. It looks like maybe, Starry Night in a way.
Yeah, the Van Gogh
it's this
painting.
turbulence and storms taking place near the poles that we had no idea was there. And so this psychedelic experience that comes later, it's kind of a wonder to me that we're kind of having that experience looking at these images of Jupiter coming back to us now that we had no idea was the case.
Yeah, and the way in which the film stock changes and like we see colors in different way, and our perception of what our base understanding of way like optics work suddenly changes and flips when we're on Jupiter is one of the characteristics. And I'm going to struggle to remember the planets here, but Jupiter has perpetual storms, or storms that last like eons, right?
Yeah, so the Great Red Spot has been around since we've been able to look at Jupiter, and since we would have been able to see it. And so, it changes a little bit in intensity, but really doesn't show signs of dissipating completely. We know of other large storms on other gas giant planets that come and go. And so there's obviously smaller storms that are taking place all over Jupiter.
There's a sort of interesting side note. I think in Arthur C. Clarke's book, they were going to go to Saturn, but Kubrick decided they'd do Jupiter because he didn't think that they would be able to represent the rings around Saturn in an effective way around that time period. Matt, what did you think of like the trip to Jupiter?
I came at it again. I came at it from a bit of a naysayery play. I feel bad. I'm talking about the things that didn't affect me. It felt very like, look, I straight up, I've never taken a hallucinogen. I don't do drugs. I drink. That's the closest I can possibly get. So when I said that I came back from a party, I was wasted. But I can't speak to the effect that sort of has in either expanding your mind or sort of at least shifting the way you perceive a thing.
Remember, the makers of this film hadn't taken any drugs either.
Sure.
So
but
it's just the people who went to see it.
Yeah. No, that's fine. I thought, again, it must be coming from just so many films we've seen. And again, I don't want to. I'm going to bring up visual examples that are by far not as meaningful as this. But like, if you want to look at even. I guess because I just did a retrospective with Sheila Evans, comedian and actress, on all the Marvel movies. We just watched all of them in a row, so it's seeped into my brain. Ant-Man or Doctor Strange, the way they talk about the subatomic universe and the way they represent that, plus Doctor Strange with all the sort of like weird, weird psychedelic mirror-y alternate dimension-y nonsense things. Those I felt like were, and again, it's a sign of the times of what you have to use for things. But like even when the trip gets beyond just lights and sort of different color filters over shots of the Grand Canyon, and when we get to sort of the bendy part, and when we get to like there's like a line of light and down, and you have the prisms or they're almost like diamond shapes,
diamonds in the sky.
And then you see I think the monolith goes over it or something like that. That to me, I was like, oh well. Ant-Man's the subatomic universe like took that straight off it. Like when it got to things like that, I was really interested. The filters against different landscapes, I was like, I don't particularly care. I love what was the technique?
Split screen.
That was amazing. And you know what? My favorite part of this, and what actually I was getting a little bit bored by the filter. But then when you see David's eye. And every time it blinks, the filter changes. I was like, that's cool. Like that's an effective use of what you're trying to do. And then after the whole prism thing, I guess the trippy part of the way David gets into that last fourth act of being in what I'll just call the hotel room, that to me was it lost me in the beginning and it got me back by the end. So I guess I think it worked for me 50-50, but it also the 50% that did work for me is the 50% that kind of counts,
right?
If that makes it. This all goes back to my little bit of like, again, it's just a pacing thing for me. I think bits could be trimmed here,
right.
But again, 68. Like, come on. Like, that's insane that this thing existed in the way that it did. And actually, a question with, I don't know how in your area of expertise or whatnot, but like with the type of, and we don't really know what type of travel is going on with David at that point, but like we've seen a lot of like breaking or going into scientific rules that we don't understand in like Interstellar and like all these other sort of films. Is there any precedent for the kind of visuals that we saw in this film that would even be remotely cognizant, or is it just like what we're trying to get across the emotion? Do you feel like, or do you think it was based on any science?
Yeah, I don't really think there's any known science that is applying to this, but it does remind me a lot. You know, I think that there's a common element in a lot of, you know, when you're traveling through a wormhole. For example, in the movie Contact, you're kind of, it's trying to get across the experience somebody is having that's like very other. And so one thing that's similar in those two movies is, you know, you have this lightscape, this apparent motion and things like that, and then you're splicing back to close-ups of their face and like the experience that they're having that is just totally different than anything, you know, obviously that they can handle. And so I kind of, it's interesting to me how similarly we've decided to portray it, even though we have no idea if that could even you know what, you know, we have no evidence that wormholes exist. We have, you know, some theoretical ideas about them. We don't know what the experience would be like at all. I'm
always amazed at the amount of the amount of information I think I know and I'm wrong based on what has been fed to me through media in my entire life. Like, and the reason I asked that weird kind of loaded, basically silly question is because in my head, we've been shown the way these travel-y things happen very similarly, like you said, so much that I'm like, maybe I don't know. But so like, it's odd when we've decided a thing looks like a thing and there's nothing really to back it up, but that's just what society has chosen.
Yeah. And there's also like distortions that we do know about that haven't been explored in film.
Okay.
So like when you're thinking about traveling very close to the speed of light, you have relativistic effects, which are going to affect your field of view. So it's going to narrow your field of view. So everything's going to be condensed into a very small area. You're going to have color distortions just due to how light coming at you changes the way you see light coming at you. And so it's interesting because there's a lot you could do with that that I don't think has really been done well. There have been some simulations of it done for documentary type things that are very short, but it might be interesting to see what that would look like in film.
I think it was something interesting I thought about when I was reading your book, and Commander Hadfield was that they're doing a lot of optic studies on the optic nerve in space and how it changes in space. And I was thinking, you know, there's been recent studies about the mantis shrimp and the actual optics of a mantis shrimp and the color of spectrums that they see. And that's the thing that I was thinking about when I was watching this, is that, you know, the title of the sequence is Jupiter and Beyond the Infinite. So it's basically trying to visualize the unvisualable, the unvisualized at this point. So he is speculating on science, not only on science that doesn't exist at this point, but also on art that doesn't exist at this point. You know, so we don't really understand. And I think that's, you know, to me, that's the extraordinary bravery of this film, is that pre-1968, you know, pre the walk on the moon, he is trying to visualize the infinite. And again, he coupled with that sort of sense of accuracy, he's also trying to make something that is profoundly resonant and using the medium in a way that he doesn't think the medium has been used for. So I'm kind of I think I take all of that context into it, and then when I watch it, I admit the first time I watched it, I was like, this is really going on for quite a while. We're seeing a lot of these colors, and we just, when are we going to land on Jupiter? And what is Jupiter going to look like? But now I kind of watch it and just am absorbed by the experience of it all, and just going, what an extraordinary sort of attempt to visualize this. And again, if you think about Kubrick and you think about 2001, there's no one, I think, today thinks about science fiction without thinking about this film. You know, this is the thing that set the tone for everything we do today. And that's kind of powerful as well. It's basically, imagine someone, you know, to bring it to a religious iconography, we all have this impression of what Jesus looked like. You know, he was this white bearded man from Nazareth. And imagine being the first person to draw that image. And now it permutates our culture in every way. And that's what 2001 is, you know, like it is the thing that permutates culture in every way.
I want to amend my initial why I think this might be perceived as slow today thing based off something you just said here, because I think it might have it flipped the switch a little bit for me. You're like, the first time you saw it, you're like, oh, I think this is going on a little long. I think that's because conditionally how we're conditioned throughout our lives to experience stories is to try to figure out what's going on next and just feel the relatively tone of pacing. But if we're wondering what's coming up next, we have that initial gut reaction of like, oh, I want to see what's coming up next. I want to see what's coming up next. And I think once that is alleviated, like if I went back and watched this sequence right now again after having watched it, because I didn't remember much of the minutia of this film, or even a lot of the even bigger moments. It's been so long. I think I would actually enjoy it more because I am no longer waiting to see what is happening next. I know what's happening next, and now I can enjoy the journey getting there. So I think there is a bit of that in there as well.
Like I said, I've seen this movie many times now. So now I see it, and I'm just like, I'm sitting in for the next 2 hours, and I'm just going to strap in and enjoy the ride.
Gotcha. Okay, there we go.
So, okay, let's get to the final stage. So now, again, you know, there's 4 parts to this movie. The fourth and final part is obviously the most sort of fantastical.
The Shining.
It's kind of the most shining. What do you... It almost... Now we jump away from your academic understanding, I guess, maybe, unless there's something I'm missing here, and jump into just the way you feel about this.
Well, I think, you know, what I experience in watching it is, you know, I'm letting it take me along for the ride, and I wasn't trying to analyze it too much. And I think it's really capturing for me wonder and awe and a mystery. And that's, you know, that's similar to with any scientific pursuit, like trying to attempt to understand this mystery, but also just appreciating it. The not understanding exactly what it is and it not being handed to you directly. I think that's what I like most about it. And so I think it captured that.
Yeah. Matt, how about you?
This is my favorite sequence in the movie. I love the whether, I mean, I'm going to call them time jumps, though I don't think it actually is in the film. You go from David in the pod to David seeing himself standing outside in the bathroom to David seeing himself eating at a dinner table to David seeing himself in a bed with the monolith just over him, which is my favorite shot in the movie. And as this is going on, he's getting incrementally older. And look, you can take that a lot of different ways from, you know, a lot of different angles. So I love up to the scene where he sort of like does the point up to the monolith and the monolith is just there like chilling. Now I want to ask both of you, because I love that, and I'm willing to sort of like go the mile of just being like, let this wash over me, not trying to figure out exactly what it means. But then there's the Star Child, the space baby thing that's on the bed that eventually comes at Earth. And again, perspective in this movie, and just from a visual sense, is all over the place. So like the baby could be close, and that's why it seems as big as the Earth, or it could be as big as the Earth. Like, you don't really. How do both of you feel about that? Like, what do we think that means? Because I have no idea at all.
I guess I just was seeing it more from a metaphorical sense of like this potential or this next stage, or like maybe even a sense of like a cyclic evolution sort of standpoint. And I think, you know, there's a lot of play with time in this. Oh, and I wanted to mention, in one part he knocks the glass off and it shatters. And I think, you know, for me, I was seeing that as a representation of there's a concept in physics which is so intimately tied to time, which is entropy. And physically, like breaking a glass is often used as like the representation of an increase in entropy, or you can think of it as roughly like an increasing disorder. And so in the equations that govern how very small things interact with one another, there's no reason why time should move in one direction or another. That's not defined. But when you get a lot of particles together, one thing that we always see happening is that entropy is increasing over time. And that's what's thought to make time go in one direction, the arrow of time, make it linear. And so there's kind of a mystery in that the early universe was very ordered and goes towards this disorder. And that's why we have this directionality to time. And so as I was watching that glass break, maybe I'm reading way
no, that's
much
great.
into it, but watching that glass break, I was thinking about how this was, really dealing with this concept of time moving forward inexorably, and the evolution that takes place within that.
Yeah, and I think the thing there, the link to time there is profoundly extraordinary, because it jumps in a way that is entirely perceptual and not governed by what we understand of time, in a linear sense. We don't know if he is simply experiencing it through memory, or we don't know if he's actually just seeing it that way. And then it's sort of this extraordinary thing happens at the end of it when he kind of reaches the end of his time. It cycles back to the sort of infancy stage. The star baby is a baby, so it's got this infancy sort of aspect to it, but it looks like him. So I think it's an extraordinary sequence, and I love that you brought like an actual mathematical reason for why it might operate like that. I love this quote with Arthur C. Clarke meeting Kubrick to talk about the film. So Arthur C. Clarke kept a journal of every time he met Stanley Kubrick, and he says, joined Stanley to discuss plot development, but spent almost all the time arguing about Cantor's transfinite groups. I decide that he's a latent mathematical genius. And the thing about Kubrick that's extraordinary is that he was a voracious reader. If you talk about Dr. Strangelove and the problem of nuclear war and the philosophical implications of nuclear war, he read every single book on that topic. On the topic of 2001: A Space Odyssey, as you kind of just gathered from meeting Arthur C. Clarke, here's a director talking about sort of obscure mathematical problems and having a debate about it. So while I know we kind of reverse engineer genius a little bit, we sort of tend to say, oh, this guy's a genius, therefore he must have thought of that. It wouldn't surprise me if Stanley Kubrick was alive, if he had a conversation about entropy in relation to that broken glass. There is a explanation. Again, if you go to Arthur C. Clarke's novel, there is an explanation of the star baby, which I find profoundly disappointing.
As most explanations tend to be in these sort of like heady narrative pieces.
Yeah, and I think to me, the explanation that Clarke has in the novel is profoundly disappointing because it's entirely pragmatic, whereas I think the thing about the visual of it, and again going back to that concept that Kubrick had of just embracing the visual storytelling, is the ending for me is entirely aspirational. It's beautiful. It is this wondrous sense of joy and awe when I see that star baby. I think it's this sort of this next evolutionary leap that I don't quite understand, and we as humans in terms of perception wouldn't understand. But that's what's exciting about it, and that's, in a way, the entire film has been playing in evolutionary epochs. So from the dawn of man to the dawn of artificial intelligence to this like other dawn which we don't really understand. I think the monolith represents that in some way. The star baby in Arthur C. Clarke's novel, there's a bigger interplay between geopolitics and what's happening with the race to Jupiter, and you see it a little bit in the quest in the Dr. Hayworth's trip to the moon.
What's going on the moon? I don't know. I can't tell you.
I can't tell you. The Russians and the Americans are basically having a sort of geopolitical spat over how to read the monolith. And
they're being very polite about it too in this scene about staying for a drink.
Yeah, exactly. And if you watch 2010, the year we make contact, that is much more explicit in that film, which features Dr. Hayworth. It's basically Russians and Americans go back to Jupiter to find the monolith, and it's much more about the geopolitics. And one of the things is in the book, there is the sort of a nuclear front to this to the trip to Jupiter. It's basically like the Russians become increasingly more paranoid at Americans, and Americans become increasingly more paranoid. Plays into that same idea of like a possible nuclear a standoff. And when the Star Baby reappears, the Star Baby basically dissolves those satellites out of orbit. And destroys the threat of nuclear holocaust. It basically transforms it in some way. Now I think it's profoundly disappointing. Like it's nowhere near as interesting as just seeing the Star Baby. Like that is a sort of incredible image unto itself. And I think any of the geopolitical stuff just becomes pity. And it reminds me of that quote. I think there's an astronaut. I can't remember which one it was. You would probably correct me on this, but he went up to the moon and when he saw the moon, saw the Earth from the moon for the first time, he said he suddenly realized how small our conflicts were and how indifferent the universe is to our conflicts. And I think the removal of that sort of geopolitical view makes this more interesting. But I don't know. I mean, like now that I've kind of given you an explanation, again, I don't think it's the right one.
Sure, it's one. But this is my question, even from when you are researching and hopefully discovering something. It's interesting because I feel like scientific discovery is always, and when you can get a scientific fact as close as we can get to one, right? That seems incredibly exciting. Mm-hmm. Where I feel like a lot of times narratively, especially when we get to these sort of what does it all mean? Where do we come from? Things when we are presented with a narrative fact, a lot of times it feels disappointing. Mm-hmm. So have you ever? And this is a weird question, but in any research you've ever done, have you ever felt the same sort of disappointment in the actual fact, in the fact that you might have discovered or learned, like where you're like, you thought it might be more fantastical, but it turns out, oh, it's just the most logical, most boring sort of type of thing?
Yeah, I mean, the closest I can think to that, so I kind of did have one kind of experience where I had like an emotional reaction to something that I saw, which was I was looking for these new galaxies, right? And so I looked back in past data to see if there was any evidence of, for example, any gas that would indicate that this group of stars was in fact a galaxy. Mm-hmm. And so I did have an experience where I looked at that image and I saw evidence of the gas, and I said, this is a new galaxy. Like, I'm the first human being to look at this and realize that this is probably
the Grcevich galaxy.
Yeah. Not named after me. And so that was this amazing experience of discovery. But I don't know, I guess in the general scheme of things, when you're actually like doing this work, it's not filled with many of these moments. It's more like the grinding. Yeah. And I don't think that, it's, I guess I don't find it disappointing to learn more about things, though. Like, I think for that, as you learn more about things, it becomes more interesting almost in a way.
Maybe that's because, most of those things are like, even if you learn something that feels benign, it's still a stepping stone to learning another thing where, like, if you learn something like in a narrative, like even the explanation of the Star Baby, like, then you're just like, oh, and it's over. Like, a narrative is obviously different than scientific research. So it's like, maybe that's why one is always leads to sort of something exciting, and one, because one is sort of leading continually to more discovery, where the other one is just like and like it's done.
Yeah.
I wonder if maybe closer to the analogy of the geopolitics thing, one of the things is we have this obviously politicized science now, is this heavy influence of politics, and I think maybe an interesting thing to ask you about is have you ever felt the sort of, aside from the actual scientific research, the politics of the work you're doing, or the funding, or actually dealing with like the actual logistics of what it is you're doing, or even if work you've seen being put out, does that ever get sort of frustrating or interesting?
Oh,
or does
absolutely, yeah. I mean, funding is like a huge thing. Like in the movie Contact, for example, like the constant attempt to get funding and things like that is difficult. And so, while studying galaxies isn't as politically fraught as climate change, for example, I think think, there's a lot to that, like just trying to navigate the practicality of it.
Yeah.
But I do have, many friends that do study climate science, and they are experiencing a lot of difficulty with where, maybe their funding hasn't been cut, but there's an uncertainty about the future, which has been difficult.
Yeah. And is the book in some way kind of maybe an attempt to like normalize science in a way, or to like make science kind of accessible, because we're living in this sort of like anti-science climate right now.
Yeah, so I haven't actually mentioned how the book really came about, which was I was procrastinating on writing my thesis.
Yes.
And I got a call from who would eventually be my co-author, Olivia Koski, and she worked with an organization called Guerrilla Science.
Yeah.
And so she was looking for astronomers to act as travel agents with the Intergalactic Travel Bureau.
Yeah.
And so what this was we'd go to like art fairs or wherever, and we'd sit down, we'd decorate it like a travel agency.
Yeah.
And then we would talk to people about what they enjoyed doing in their everyday life. And we would plan a space vacation. So choose a destination based on what they like and what they enjoy doing, and kind of adapt their human experience into space. And so we were planning many of these vacations. I probably planned like thousands of space vacations for people in all sorts of places, and museums and on the street.
Nice.
And so after years of doing this together, which was just a lot of fun, that was how the book came about. Was we kind of wanted to put these into some repository of experiences that people could have.
I have to say, the trip to Venus is the most terrifying thing I've ever.
Yeah.
It sounds extraordinary. You have to read the book on the trip to Venus. And I'm now though. So with that in mind, do you think a film like 2001 has the power to kind of change a viewpoint, or positively influence the public perception of the work you do?
I do. I mean, from my own experience being inspired by film to study this, I think it's important to expose people to it, and I think all films are a great way to do that. Sci-fi is a great way to do that, and in particular, this one being more philosophical, I think really captures how people are thinking deeply about these questions. So it's almost like the philosophy of it, which is I really like that aspect to it.
Would you go see it in 70 now that you've seen it? Would you go see it in theaters in 70 millimeter this week? Now that you've kind of talked about, I mean, because we've leveled our criticism, I think, in two ways on this, which is that it's entirely aspirational, it's beautiful, it's wonderful, it's a thing to behold, but it's a difficult thing to watch. It's not like other films. It is, which is why I wanted to really preface the operatic nature of it, like in this 4-act structure of it, which is really unusual and, very definitively defined 4 acts. It doesn't just bleed into each other. But both of you, do you kind of view the film slightly differently, having revisited it or thinking about it that way, or is it just one of those ones you'll just sort of chalk up to, I saw it, I'm good?
I mean, I think for me, it's the grandparent of a trillion things I love, and in that sense, watching it, I have a sense of thankfulness or gratitude that it does what it does so well. I guess what it comes down to for me is watching it now as a just like, hey, I'm going to watch a movie, I'm going to throw on 2001. That's not going to work for me. If I get into the headspace of, let's start thinking about what everything really means, this could be still a springboard for me to do that. And as far as even like, I like little minimalist things too that my brain does when rewatching a film. And this time around, I noticed, I felt like this was happening. I know it's not really meant to, maybe, but then I purposely, after I watched this one thing happen, I purposely made my brain think this is why this thing is happening as we go through. Every time you see the monolith, a certain like,
that score,
like a very sort of chanty thing happens. I started perceiving those moments as if not as if the film was scored, but as if the monolith was actually making that music every time it was on screen and the characters were actually hearing it. And that to me gave me a little bit more of a a little bit more of a spark to the entire thing, because I was like, I mean, there's a whole mathematics to music regardless. So like, I would not be, and again, this might be a little wishful thinking, but like, I wouldn't be surprised if, we ever came across a thing like this, that it was spewing music, like, or something that felt musical. Mm-hmm. So I like it when I can rewatch a film to say that I can take small moments that I'm perceiving from a different way and make those even more meaningful than before. So to answer the general question, this I'll say it. Too slow, would watch again. That's where I'm going to stand.
And how about yourself?
I would watch it again, but I want to wait a little while to kind of absorb it and forget a little bit. Because I think I had forgotten so much from the previous time that I'd watched it. It really made it a different experience. And I want to forget it and watch it again. I don't know how long that's going to take. But
well, from my point of view, I would highly recommend going to, if there is a 70mm screening available to you, I would highly recommend going to see it, especially if you haven't seen it before. Because I think it's quite a transcendent experience. For me, I'll be brief, but I've talked about this on the podcast before. I'm not a religious person in any way, and yet this film is the closest I can think of to a religious experience or kind of going to a religious sermon, because it's so enigmatic. It's made from one of the masters. It has this sort of in a way monolithic stature in my life, where not only does, like you said, Matt, it triggers the things that I love. It is the grandfather of all the things that I love. It is a profoundly moving experience for me every time I see it, and to the point where I wanted my son to experience it for the first, it to be one of the first experiences he saw. And he may hate it over time. I'm fully aware of the role a parent can play in like actually turning you off material. But I found the more I watch it, the more I deeply fall in love with this film, and the more I kind of enjoy the sort of abstractness of it, and the way it points to cinema as aspirational. Which I think is something kind of profoundly beautiful. It's I think it leads into so many things, and aside from that, the fact that it is so detail oriented, I think like the point that you made about like, the grind of the work is kind of unglamorous. I feel like the grind of making this film was unglamorous and was reading a lot and thinking a lot and spending a lot of time, but it's all up on screen and it's so evident. So I'm really pleased that Christopher Nolan is bringing it back. And I think that was actually, though I really like Interstellar, I think that was a sort of a note through Interstellar that was really evident, was that Interstellar was really aspirational about humankind's journey through the stars. It was really about us saying, no, we should put aside all the sort of difficulties we were dealing with in life and be aspirational about like our place in amongst the cosmos. So it's
just love, man.
I think Interstellar gets misrepresented a lot, because I think that's actually what the film's about. And that scene, with Anne Hathaway saying love is the transcendent quality, that the dimension that takes us through, is actually what the film is trying to talk about the entire time. So I kind of love it, and I think it stems from 2001.
Oh yeah.
I would highly recommend anyone going to see this. Not just if you're a film student, not just if you're interested in cinema history, but I think in terms of like, it gives you a perspective to think about humanity. And I want to thank you so much for coming to actually give us an alternate perspective, because one of the things that's difficult about this film is like, it can be a little boring. It could be a little bit tiresome, but it's actually fun to hear a scientist talk about this film and the way it affects them. So I thank you so much for your time.
Yeah, thanks for having me. And it was a great experience to watch it again, to be spurred to watch it again.
Yeah. And I would highly recommend everyone reading your book, A Vacation Guide to the Solar System, because it also taps into that kind of aspirational quality about travel and about space travel. And I think, we only need to look at Elon Musk to think about the aspirational quality of like wanting to go, no, we're not just having to live here. What if we could look at what if we looked beyond? So I thank you so much for your time, and thank you for joining us for that.
Thanks so much.
Jana, when you are not coming on to film podcasts to school us in all things scientific about science fiction, where can folks find you otherwise, even outside the book, outside of everything else?
Not your home address, by the way.
Yeah. Where do you live? No, social media or
Social
anything.
media, websites, how can people find the book?
Jana GRC on pretty much everything. I'm on Twitter. And some exciting news that we didn't mention is that the book has been optioned by Paramount. And so there's a script under development being written by Jonathan Goldston and John Francis Daly.
Oh,
so very exciting.
Spidey fame.
Shalia Evans, I think, was really excited about John Francis Daly on the podcast.
Yes.
Because he's from Freaks and Geeks, right?
Yep.
So that's exciting.
That's great. Congratulations on that.
Are you going to be involved in the production in some way?
Yeah, we've been talking mainly about science from the scientific aspect of it. But
that's so cool.
That's really cool. That's so hopefully the next epoch of space travel movies we'll have heard it here first directly from the author. Yes.
That's where we're. And please come back when that's out. We'd love to talk with you about it. Shahir, when you are not finding borderline religious experiences with things that actually are strong enough to maybe start their own religion, and you could say that with sci-fi it actually has done that, where can folks find you?
You can find me at the Church of Scientology.
That's different. That's different.
What are those ether the
Thetans?
I don't know. You can not find me at the Church of Scientology, but you can find me at my website, www.shahirdaud.com. That's SHAHIRDAUD, and all my links to life and work are there. Matt, when you are perceiving time either elongated or from reality, how do you watch movies?
You can find me both existing and not at MatthewKroll.com. That's MatthewKroll.com for my life and works. Also Skeletor, the number 4, PREZ on Instagram, or Emperor MSK on Twitter. Also, I'm going to keep teasing this until I can talk about it. Exciting announcement coming up soon. Can't tell you about it. That's all I'll say. And of course, if you are interested in anything film, science, anything we've talked about, 2001, any other film, if you want to request a film, please email us at onlymoviepodcast@gmail.com or tweet us at onlymoviepod on Twitter. Also, if you got some stars to spare on iTunes, we love getting as many as you are willing to give us there. Write us a review there. Those are the things we check the most. This has been the only podcast about 2001, A Space Odyssey.
Nobody's talking about this movie.
Jana, thank you so much for coming on.
Thanks for having me.
Super fun, and we will you'll hear us anyway.
You'll hear us next week.
If time is actually linear, you'll hear us next week. If not, you might have already heard us. We'll see. Well, maybe.
I was going to say bye-bye, but that's just 2 words repeated. You can't even say them backwards.
You just did.
Yeah, there you go.
Zing!
Bye-bye.